Welcome back to Open Source Knowledge. I'm your host, Nasta, and right here next to me is Phil Svitek. Phil, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's 2018.
I know, a new year, so exciting. And you know what's also exciting is we have an amazing guest, Vito Gutilla, your economics connoisseur.
That's a good description.
For a moment, I thought you were going to say the economy is very exciting. I was like, oh,
So
I don't know
excited.
if it's doing too good, but we'll find out.
That's one of those things that I'm actually wanted to ask is why we are so intimidated by this topic.
Just in general, you mean?
Yeah, why do you think we're intimidated? Why does that word economics frighten us?
Because I think it means something different to everybody. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think everyone kind of freaks out over it, because you have the school of thought that I most kind of ascribe to is called the Austrian School of Economics, but that's very not really fashionable at the moment. Because, like I said, there's so many other schools of thought on everything, you know, whether you're talking about capital theory, monetary theory, anything like that, and who knows even what those things are, right? So you're going to listen to whoever's shouting the loudest for the most part, and they're always saying different things, and who knows who's telling the truth, and it's just kind of this big mess all the time, you know, as far as the, you know, everybody's concerned. You know?
To take a quick step back in terms of your sort of expertise and your interest in economics, how did that come about?
I've always found just systems interesting, like how systems work, whether that's computers. I really don't know that much about computers, but I find them interesting, or anything like that. And when I kind of stumbled across, I think I found first a guy named Stefan Molyneux, who is not really an economist, but he talks a lot about economics, and that's how I kind of got interested in it, because I really enjoyed whenever he would go into kind of talking about some economics, and that led me towards a lot of other resources that I kind of delved into and really just kind of fell off the deep end into a little bit for a while, about 3 or 4 years ago. Just read a bunch of books and read a bunch of websites, and just found it very interesting, you know.
And so I have to ask you, what does it mean to you? Because obviously you say there's different types of economics that we can all research and describe and kind of go in depth on. But what does it mean to you? What specific part of economics are you specialize in?
Economics to me is most interesting when it's talking about individuals and how individuals act when given certain circumstances and incentives. The school of economics that I kind of ascribe to, the Austrian school, starts from a completely different place than most schools of economics start from. Oftentimes you'll see, like, you know, if you ever take an economics class in college or something like that, I know I did, you'll have like all these equations and graphs and, you know, functions and calculus and, you know, all these like crazy symbols and stuff. And there's none of that in the Austrian School of Economics. It starts from the basic axiom, I guess, you know, this true knowledge that human beings use scarce means to achieve definite ends. And from there, we logically deduce all of the rest of economics using verbal logic, not using mathematics. Because there's no way to quantify how much I prefer one thing as opposed to another, or there's no way to quantify the changing desires and goals of every human being in the entire world. And you can kind of get around that a little bit, and you can sometimes calculate certain things in terms of purely like pure quantities, like whether the stock market's at this level or something like that. But it's very ineffective in terms of forecasting, I guess. So if that answers your question at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's all very interesting because everybody has different hobbies and different things that sparks their interest, and clearly you have a bunch with karate and playing the violin, but that's why we were just kind of interested to see what it meant to you. Mm-hmm. Phil has some great questions that
awesome.
He should kick off.
What would be, so for you was just kind of discovering through him, and what's a good entry point now that you sort of know more about it for an average person into, you know, just a cursory knowledge of economics, because as you said, it's healthy to look at it from an individual standpoint. Mm-hmm. So for the average individual, what's that starting position?
Okay. Well, I would not recommend people do what I did and go check out Stefan Molyneux unless you're very specifically interested in very libertarian kind of commentary, political commentary along with the economics, because he's very much a political commentator, and even is not my favorite anymore. Just because I don't really like his presentation. I would recommend people go to a website called the Foundation for Economic Education, or another website called the Mises Institute. And those, to me, are the best places to start. They both have education sections on the website that kind of give you an intro to intro to economics, basically, and kind of give you a very step-by-step kind of read this one, and then this one, and then this one, or even a more basic outline if you want that. So they have a lot of great resources on those two websites. As far as like books to read, I always recommend people start with Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. Which is a very kind of non-technical, very, I guess, vernacular kind of explanation of basic economic concepts to kind of give you an intro to how to think about economics even. Yeah.
So that's interesting. And those like little pieces of what books and stuff I should read, that's where I need to start. Because I think also too, we hear these concepts, I mean, we've talked about personal finance and everything before. It's overwhelming because there's so many books you can read, especially these days. There's thousands of bookstores, thousands of things they have those 101 books for dummies and all these things, but you don't know which one's the best. So it's interesting to know if there's one piece that you can kind of start with and then go back from there and kind of figure it out.
And you need to like have some sort of frame of reference to judge which books you should read, and you don't really get that unless you have some kind of starting point, because like you said, otherwise you're just floating in this sea of just like disparate opinions that you don't even know are disparate because you don't understand anything they're saying. So yeah, it's definitely kind of daunting if you don't know where to start with it. And again, there's lots of different opinions too. Like there's definitely different basic economics books that you can go check out from different schools of thought as well.
This is I don't mean it to be facetious any sort, but why should people care about economics? Because when you take the term personal finances, has the word personal in it, therefore, it applies to me. Economics is kind of, I feel, maybe this is just me, that you just apply it to the government, and it's out of my control, so why care about it?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question, and I think it's a big reason why people don't care about economics is because they do think about it that way. It's like, it's way over my head, I have no say in what happens anyway, all this kind of stuff. But if you don't understand economics, we all, by the nature of the system we're in, we all have at least some sort of say in terms of what's going on. You can debate, how much of one, every single individual has. But if you're going to be voting for either politicians or policies, especially for local city ordinances, or I guess I don't know what the word is, but whenever you directly vote for something in the city, you're having an opinion on economics one way or the other if you're voting for one of those policies. And if you don't actually know what you're talking about, you're going to vote based on your gut reaction, which is most of the time, in my experience, wrong for a lot of people. Because, I don't know, a lot of people have a lot of mistaken ideas about economics. So economics is everything. It's how people relate to one another. It has everything to do with the value of your money. It has everything to do with the fluctuations in the stock market that affect all of us, in terms of how you can affect it or kind of influence it. It might not be the biggest factor for you, but it's definitely important to understand, and it's interesting.
It's crazy to think too that it's not just having to do with money or a rule. I think that's why it's a little confusing, is because it has to do with so many different topics.
Yeah, there are a lot of different parts of it for sure.
Yeah, it's not just math or
it's not just money. Whenever I say I like economics, the first question everybody asks me is, are you in the stock market then? Like, because that's what people think of when they think economics is the stock market, which is probably the most, visible part of the economy for a lot of people. But it has way more to do with everything than just, the ups and downs, of the, the S&P 500 or whatever. It's about, how does money even come about? Like, what is money? How does it function? What is the effect when you pump more money into the system? Why should we care about that? Because it affects, everyone through, devaluing every individual unit of that money, in this case the dollar that we have, all that kind of stuff, so it's way more all-encompassing than just stocks or something like that.
If you had to sort of break it apart and say, okay, what are the benchmarks that define a good or bad economy, so the stock market would being one of them, the currency exchange rate, maybe, what are some other things?
The interest rate is actually a huge part of economic health, and something that has not been allowed to kind of be healthy for a very long time now. The Federal Reserve kind of controls interest rates to a loose degree through a lot of different policies that they have, whether that's open market operations, all that kind of stuff. They're basically buying and selling assets on the market in order to pump more money or take money out of the system in order to influence interest rates. And that interest rate is an extremely important part of an economy because it's a signal to all sorts of entrepreneurs when it's low enough to invest in long-term projects. For example, if you're, I don't know, interested in building a factory that's going to take a long time to build, it's going to take a long time to produce the product that you're wanting to produce. You have to invest a lot of capital up front, though, to build all this stuff, and you're not going to see the fruit of that for a long time. That's a long-term project. If interest rates are really high, you might say, this isn't really worth it for me. I'm going to have to pay a lot in interest over time. If it's really low, you might say, hey, this is worth it now. If interest rates are artificially low because the Federal Reserve is manipulating interest rates artificially and it's not actually representative of what's actually happening in the economy, we call that malinvestment. Resources are dedicated to projects that are not actually going to turn out well in the long run. And that's all influenced by the incentives presented by these interest rates. And so that's a big reason why you have something like the crash of 2008, or you have the crash in 1928, I think it was the crash in the Great Depression, or it might have been 29.
29.
I think it was 29. That's the reason why those happen. Why they are prolonged is a kind of a different story, different topic. But I would say interest rates are probably one of the biggest signs of a healthy economy. The stock market is actually, a lot of people think because it's so high right now, it has to be a good thing. It's actually, a lot of the reason the stock market is so high right now is because interest rates are so low, you can't get a lot of return on your investment anywhere else. You have to kind of rely on equities or stocks instead of bonds or anything else, because that's the only place you're going to get the kind of returns you've promised to people for their retirement, for their investments, or whatever it is, especially for pensions, that kind of stuff. So that's a big reason why the stock market's so high right now. It doesn't necessarily indicate economic health. It could be just everything's being funneled in here because everything else is kind of crap right now, So it just depends,
What do you think of the overinflation of value to companies like Uber, Airbnb, and all those that have these insane valuations, but they're not pulling in that much revenue?
Yeah, I think was it Snapchat was a big example of that.
Yeah.
When it went public, it went way up and then just
Yeah.
because of course they have no actual business model to make a profit. Everyone's just like, oh, this is popular, it's going to do well, and all these people who think they know what they're doing pump money into it, and then they realize, oh, this actually wasn't what I was thinking it was. So yeah, a lot of tech companies like that can be overvalued, I think, but it just depends. The long run, we'll see who's overvalued and who's undervalued because, we'll see who is competitive or not. Like Facebook has become a much better investment than it used to be. I think they still have a little ways to go, but I think Uber in particular is probably a better value than something like Snapchat for sure, because they actually have a business model, a revenue model. But a lot of these social media sites like Twitter for a long time and all these kind of things were not worth the prices that were being paid for them, in my opinion. That's the thing. It's all subjective. If you think it is, you're going to pay that, but it might not turn out the way you want in the long run,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm taking this all in right now, so I'm like just trying to divulge all the information that I'm listening
For sure.
to. But
It's definitely a lot. Yeah.
It is. Well, and it is truly opinions too, because just like if you're gonna invest into a company and hope that it does well and trust in it, then that's all of your opinion. That's what you want to do. And then that kind of fluctuates. If everybody has the trust in this one company, then that can make it go up. And
yeah, that's
the
you being an
valuation.
entrepreneur in a way.
Right.
That's the whole deal. My economic insights don't necessarily tell me whether people are going to like Snapchat enough to keep either paying for advertisements or making these decisions to actually make it profitable. I don't know that based on what I know about economics. All I can do is kind of guess, and have an informed guess essentially. And that's what everybody does whenever they anticipate somebody wanting to buy this thing over here, and so they produce it over here. Or I think this is going to be more valuable later, so I'm going to buy that. It's all a bunch of informed guesses essentially,
Where do you stand then on cryptocurrencies?
I've been doing a little bit of that lately. It's very interesting. Everyone's talking about Bitcoin because it's gone up like crazy. It's actually down again around 11,000, I think.
But answer this for me, guys. I'm sorry. Excuse my ignorance, but I know a lot of people are asking this. It's fake money, technically. It's fake.
Well, money is fake.
Well, money, I guess you're right.
What is fake?
But that's the thing is Bitcoin is just something that somebody made up.
I mean,
So's money.
most of the dollars in circulation right now are just digital. There's honestly
Right.
not a dollar bill for most of the money in circulation today. And so it's kind of a similar thing, except with Bitcoin, I'm not the best person to ask about how it works, but
Right.
from my understanding, the way it works is there's a set amount of Bitcoin that can ever be mined in all of time and space, I guess. I think it's around 23 million Bitcoins. And the way it works, it's modeled after gold, actually. So you have to put a certain amount of processing power towards trying to solve this very difficult, complicated math equation. And all of these computers around the world are trying to solve this equation. People dedicate massive amounts of resources to this. There's whole farms of processors or networks, I guess, whatever, servers dedicated to crunching the numbers on this math problem. And I think it changes every, I don't remember how long, every certain couple of weeks or something like that. Somebody will solve the problem, and you get, I think, something like 8 Bitcoins. And you get to somehow control the some sort of information on the blockchain. I'm not sure exactly how it works. But that's how you get new Bitcoins. You have these computers trying to process this math equation, and whoever solves it essentially gets a new block of Bitcoins. And it is, kind of just digital. People get nervous about that. But I mean, like I said, what is money?
Right.
Money is just something that everyone's agreed that we're going to trade this thing, and I'm going to accept it from you, because I think that this person over here is going to accept it from me later. And that could be anything.
That is true. It's all kind of imaginary.
It's
if
actually
you
one of my
think about
favorite topics is how money actually comes about in an economy, or in a primitive economy, and
Right.
then comes to where it is now, which is a whole different.
It's a whole
thing,
different
but-
thing, but it is very intriguing.
The interesting part about it, and I'm not too versed enough to kind of really support this argument, other than the fact of if you look at any piece of machinery, the only thing that's never gone down is the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certain parts of the internet have gone down, like a website crashes or something like that, but the internet as a whole is the only piece of technology that has never actually shut down.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it is kind of the future. I do think cryptocurrency has a lot of potential in the future. I don't think it's there yet. It needs to be more widely accepted before it can be an actual money. People right now are treating it more as an investment, which is not. It's not a good investment. I wouldn't recommend putting a lot of money into Bitcoin right now. I like the idea of it as a money, but it's not there yet. Hopefully someday it'll become more widespread, more adopted, because it's a lot of useful qualities about it other than it just being money. It's very secure. It keeps a ledger of all the transactions that have taken place. You can set up smart contracts through it so that if certain conditions are met, then the funds will be transferred all by yourself, and you can do this anywhere in the world for very low fees. I mean, right now the fees are a little bit high because of some technical things that are going on in Bitcoin right now. But ideally the fees would be very low, like a penny or more, like it used to be in Bitcoin. So it has a lot of potential, and it could be a very cool thing in the future. And one of my favorite things about it is it's not regulated by anybody. It's more of a organic kind of money than what we've been using for over a century now.
So what is the role of government in economy? Or obviously that's a big question.
Yeah,
Ask
totally.
a communist versus
Exactly.
a capitalist, and you get two completely different answers. I get
Yeah,
that,
for sure.
but-
And I think it's important people probably know that I have my own, of course, opinions on government from a moral perspective. That doesn't have to play in economics, but it certainly can. My opinion is that government doesn't have a huge role to play in economics, or doesn't necessarily have to. Now, you have to make two distinctions. You could say in this theoretical world where, I make all the, stipulations about, what the conditions are, or in the real world right now that we're living in. Because it's so complicated. All the things that have been done up until this point in history have made everything just so crazy and insane all over the place. I still think it would be a better thing to get a lot more government out of economics and get it back on a more sustainable, more healthier path. But in theory especially, I don't think there's much role for government at all in economics. I think it mostly takes care of itself, and especially in the long run. Whether you're talking about, I don't know, regulation, whether you're talking about monetary policy, creating money, all that kind of stuff, it's not really required for any of it. Again, if you're talking about the real world right now, there's all kinds of complications for that, but especially in a theoretical sense, I don't think there's much role for it.
Right. When you say it takes care of itself, what do you mean by that? Because how, like, just by person to person, business to business, taking care of things where it doesn't technically need to be regulated by the government?
It depends on what you're talking about, I guess. If you're talking about, I don't know, issuing licenses to florists or something like that,
Right.
that's a whole different thing. I mean,
Right.
that's not strictly economic, I guess. If you're talking about something like antitrust law or unions or anything like that, yeah, I don't think there's much reason to involve government at all. In all those cases, I'd have to get more into detail about any one specific thing, but I guess to be brief, in terms of even antitrust, let's talk about that. The fear is that, this one company will get so much power and, take over all these other companies, and then they'll have control over prices, and they can just jack up their prices and no one will have any choice to go anywhere else. But in any case that's ever happened in history, it's not lasted very long. Like the Rockefeller Corporation, or whatever his Standard Oil, I guess, is one people point to a lot. But they actually lost a ton of market share very quickly after they, came up, because they invented this new thing, this new process, to make kerosene, to make oil, to make all these other products out of petroleum that no one else had ever had before. And so, of course, they got a lot of market share. But as people figured out how to do the same thing, they lost market share, and now they're nowhere to be seen. And the same could be said of most monopolies that have kind of, I guess if you're just listening, I did air quotes there, throughout history, that haven't been somehow supported by either being like a government contractor where they get a guaranteed business from the government that doesn't have to actually, get money from people that voluntarily give it to them, but they can just take it from people or create it or whatever. So that's one example of where I would say that people kind of get really scared about this one thing, like, what will happen if this happens? But if you look at it carefully, it doesn't actually happen, and theoretically couldn't really happen. Is this one company going to keep out all their other competitors forever? I mean, if they jack up prices, isn't that a huge incentive to come in and underbid them and provide the product cheaper if it's possible to be provided cheaper? All these kinds of things,
Well, obviously, you kind of have to look at history in that sense, but there is a worry from what I've read with companies when you have like AOL combining with other, Verizon and Yahoo, and then you got AT&T, DirecTV combining, and now Disney's got Marvel, they've got Fox, they've got all these companies, Lucasfilms. So, I mean, do you sort of feel like the landscape maybe is changing and monopolies, are a lot easier to maintain?
Oftentimes, especially, it really depends on the industry you're talking about. In terms, everyone was kind of talking about the mergers in the telecom industry recently, I guess. And the thing is, the telecom industry is not a free market industry at all. I mean, there's all kinds of regulations that go into that. In fact, oftentimes a lot of these mergers are incentivized by whether it's taxation policies or regulatory policies, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more of that, I would say, than there otherwise would be because of a lot of the interventions that have been going on. Because any intervention always creates other problems that needs other interventions that creates other problems. And it's this whole spiraling thing. So again, like I was talking about before, if you're talking about the real world, oftentimes, yeah, a lot of this is happening. A lot of, what you could say monopolistic competition is happening. But I would say that the causes of it are not economic so much as they are intervention, So that is when I say that, antitrust is not something that we need. That's not to say that, negative things don't happen or that I'm totally a huge fan of every single merger that ever happens or anything like that,
It's very interesting because just even hearing you talk to, and you've mentioned multiple times, this is my opinion. And that's kind of how it seems economics works. Because it's all about companies, technically, that are starting from something and growing, and it's just all about opinion of whether people think that that company is worth them putting their money into, and that's just kind of how everything's stimulated.
Exactly,
it's popular opinion.
Well, it's driven by the demands people have. I always say you could have a very, moral and kind of, I don't know, cool, awesome society that, wants a lot of what we would call good things. Or moral things, and that's what's going to be produced. If you have a society that wants a lot of immoral things and a lot of, I don't know, heroin or something, I don't know, then that's what's going to be produced and, supplied. And, it's all about what people want, and that's what demand and supply, I guess.
Supply and demand.
Exactly.
I remember that from
yeah,
high
supply and
school.
demand, which is, a big part of it for sure. That's
Right.
definitely a big part of it. But, yeah, that's not to say that, anything that is demanded should be supplied. That's a whole different question than economics can answer. That's economics just answers the question, given this situation, how will these people act in response to the stimulus or incentives that are given to them?
This might answer my second question, but I'll start with the first one. The difference between macro and microeconomics.
That's a hotly debated question within the economics world. My answer to that question would be there's not a really big difference. It's kind of an artificial divide for the most part. When you deal with economics in terms of classes of people or goods or small groups as opposed to big groups, it's really kind of a fallacy. Because in my opinion, economics comes down to the individual and their decision. And if you have a big group of individuals, it's no different. It's just a bunch more people making decisions. And they don't behave any differently than a single person, really. You can analyze the movements of capital across nations the same way as you analyze the movement of capital between two people. It's about incentives. It's about I guess just circumstances that they're in. It's not about this formula applies to this and this formula applies to this, or anything like that.
Here's my sort of, I don't know what to call it, maybe my moralistic question or viewpoint. But I feel like, the term globalization has gotten tossed around. And part of, as we're inserting the word moral into economics to be part of that definition, I feel like what makes economics so hard is that the more people you have, the harder it is. Yeah, you can take a vote and you can have, let's say, 60-70% of the vote go to one thing, but that if you have enough people on that 30% side of the loss, they're going to be quite unhappy. And the more that grows in a number of areas, I don't know, I guess my question off of that sort of idea is it better to sort of separate into smaller factions in a sense and kind of
in terms of like nations, like smaller groups of people in countries,
or even just the idea of, let's take America, have states regulate their own sort of governing laws versus
more localized.
Yeah, I feel like it seems to me, if I'm correct, for me, that would make more sense of the more local you get, the easier things become.
I would agree with that. I think centralized control is always worse and less efficient than localized control. If you have to have control at all, I would argue for control to be localized all the way down to the individual, and over whatever they control themselves, whatever they own. But the smaller the unit, the more efficient you can get, for sure. When you try to organize an entire economy like the USSR did, or like communist China did, or any of these other examples, it really doesn't go well at all. And that's complete top-down control. And so you scale down from there to even smaller, and I think it just gets better. Yeah.
Excellent. Should we talk about the government shutdown?
Yeah, why not? We're here, aren't we?
Why not?
Well, so, and I don't necessarily want to date this to today specifically, but there is a government shutdown, and it's not the first one in the history of the U.S. But I want to, understand it. What does that mean, and how does it affect the economy, and sort of what are the things to look for in terms of, are we in the right direction, or are we going in a worse direction?
Totally. I mean, I've not really been keeping track of this particular shutdown, but I do remember, I don't remember when it was, but I remember the last one.
It seemed 2013?
I think it was something like that. It seemed to me that nothing really happened because of it. I think people overestimate the importance of the day-to-day doings of, Washington, D.C., I guess. And I don't think it'll really amount to much in the long run. But it is interesting. I'm just fascinated by everything that's happening right now, just because it's kind of like watching a train crash. You're just like, I can't look away. But yeah, I don't know. In terms of the stock market, or in terms of like anything else you could talk about, like kind of on the surface, I don't think it'll change much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, from what I read, and this is just very baseline sort of digging into it, it lasted for about 16 days, and initially the stocks and so forth took a hit, but then within like a month and a half, things kind of recovered.
It all comes back. People kind of freak out, like, oh, what's happening? But then it's like, okay, phew. And then pretty soon it just jumps back up. Yeah. Those sorts of things are little dips, and then everything gets back on. It's when It's when the big crashes come that kind of the major worries come. You know, I don't stress too much about little dips here and there.
What do you think the next major?
I anticipate it'll be in the next few years, probably, but it could be longer than that. You never know. The thing with predicting the movements of economies like that, it's impossible to pinpoint exactly when something's going to happen. You can more talk about inevitabilities. Like, it's inevitable that there will be some sort of crash because there's huge bubbles all over the place, whether you're talking about student loans, car loans, commercial real estate, anything like that. There's even kind of another housing bubble. And it's all one big bubble that kind of encompasses a bunch of different industries. So it's got to come down at some point. It's not sustainable at all, given the interest rates that are in place right now. The Fed's policy, it still has a huge amount of assets that it owns that it's going to have to get rid of at some point, which is going to do all kinds of crazy things. But I don't know when it's going to come. And I was talking to a family friend of ours the other day who is a financial advisor, and he knows a lot more about kind of the day-to-day personal finance stuff than I do. And he was saying that, even the 2008 crash, he's gained all that back. It's not like that's going to ruin everything forever and, you're never going to get your money back. Like, it's going to be fine in the long run. And I think that's going to be the case, even in the case of a big crash like this, because it's kind of, you can't stop the momentum of, an economy this size at this point.
Well, what I've read is that you got to just know how to ride that wave. Because essentially, what is it? Bear markets, right? That's the low one, or is it?
I honestly am not positive which one's
bull
which.
Versus bear. I think it's the bear market when things are really low. I mean, generally, oftentimes, like, it happens at least once a year. Mm-hmm. That we get into like the minus 40% of the stock market, and that happens regularly.
Yeah,
and people don't really care or realize.
No, totally. I mean, there's people who are paid a lot of money to figure that out and kind of surf that wave, and that's not my expertise at all. And even they are often wrong about it. It's a hard thing to predict, and it's a difficult thing to do for sure. But in the long run, everything's mostly up still, at least for the United States economy, which is a good thing for us for sure.
What's your take on, I was reading something where the argument was, and I haven't followed up in terms of what the update is on both sides, but us as the U.S. not participating in environmental sort of updates and stuff, it will actually hurt our economy, because as things go green in Europe and so forth, they're just going to develop new technologies and so forth, and it's going to be a booming business, and we're going to miss out. That's
possible, I guess. It depends on what the demand is, as opposed to how ready the technology is. I remember when everyone was freaking out about solar panels a few years ago. I thought to myself, yeah, it's a great idea. I love the idea, or electric cars, but they rely so much on subsidies. They're not marketable yet. They're not ready for a mass market. They're too expensive still. I think the price will drop. For sustainable kind of, technology like that, especially solar panels. Unless, like, I think just the other day I saw that we just recently put a tariff on importing solar panels, which will make solar panels much more expensive here, which is unfortunate. But I don't know. Maybe it might cause some sort of, economic turbulence to not invest in those technologies now. But I think when the market's ready for it, there'll be a supply of it.
Mm-hmm. Going back to your utopian theory of the good versus the heroin addicts, what's your sort of opinion now that weed is completely legalized in California, and how that's going to affect at least California's economy?
I mean, it depends on how. I need to brush up on how exactly it's being treated. It's definitely not completely legal. I think there's still a lot of restrictions on it. I mean, you can buy it, of course, and that kind of stuff. That's great. I'm a libertarian, so I'm totally fine with you doing whatever you want with that. But I don't personally partake, and I've not been keeping track of exactly what the legal status of it is. But it could be a good thing. I mean, I know my wife's from Denver, and Colorado has definitely had a lot of money raised from their legalization of it, and I think could possibly be kind of a similar thing here. And I think the commerce from the legitimate trade of marijuana will definitely be a little bit of a boost. But California's got some pretty major economic problems for sure, and I don't know if that's enough to completely solve all of it. But I'm a big fan of it. Yeah.
All right.
That was a lot of great information for me. I feel like I need to go pick up a book, though.
And I will say, too, that the Austrian School of Economics in particular is a lot more approachable to a beginner than a lot of other schools of thought because it is not mathematic. It's very logical. You know, everything's very like this and then this and then this and then this. You know, it builds upon itself very, very logically, I guess. So I would definitely recommend people start out with something like Economics in One Lesson by Hazlitt or even Man, Economy, and State by Murray Rothbard or something like that. Yeah.
What do you think, we asked this in terms of personal finance, but why do you think talking about the economy is sort of a taboo thing? Is it because people don't have enough knowledge, or?
I think it's because you can't really talk about the economy without talking about policy, and that gets people really riled up for sure. I've tried to not get too into it, you know, but it's kind of hard not to. But yeah, people get really riled up about that sort of stuff, I think, and that's more what they get upset about than the economics in particular, because most of the time they don't really know what the economics are. They just know kind of the result they want, and they have different opinions on how to get there, you know, just based on their gut instinct, I guess.
Do you think that's healthy, or is that just avoiding the issue and making it worse?
Which issue?
Did the fact of us just being so taboo and not wanting to talk about it?
I think it does probably make it worse. I mean, I think people don't want to go to a lot of the effort that it takes to really learn a topic, whether that's economics or anything else, and they kind of are happy to just give out whatever opinion feels good to them at the time, based on kind of their own reasoning, I guess, or whatever that is. And I think it is a little bit harmful in the long run. But I mean, I'm not going to stop people from, you know, talking about things. I mean, you do your best with what information you have, and I get that, you know. So I'm certainly not perfect either. There's a lot I don't know. So I get it.
There's a lot that we don't know
Yeah.
either.
That's why we brought you in here, to give us all the lowdown on economics.
For sure.
And if you had to deduce it down, I mean, it seems like at least going out and voting, that's one of the most like impactful ways, apart from
At this point, it seems like it. I think almost a more impactful way, though, is to engage in the economy. You know, become an entrepreneur, start a business. You know, online commerce has been one of the biggest boons to entrepreneurs in the history of the world. It's easier than ever to have your own online thing, whatever that is, whether that's like a little ebook that you write and kind of market, or whether that's, you know, selling on Amazon or having any number of other possibilities. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on in online business these days, and it's easier than ever. So I definitely recommend people check out something like Tom Woods has a really great little course about creating your own online business and that kind of stuff. It's definitely a really cool opportunity to engage in the economy yourself, and, you know, try to forecast what people are going to want and provide that thing. And you'll learn a lot just through the experience of doing that, for sure. Just how all this works.
All right, that's good advice.
Yeah.
Anything else, Sally?
I think that's it. Thank you so much, Vito. This was
course.
fun. Economics isn't scary, guys. It's really great. It's all opinion based. We can have a great conversation.
Yeah.
And just chat about the economy. How fun.
Absolutely. And is there anything you want to promote? People follow you on Twitter or something like to?
Well, in my other life as a fiddle player, you can find me at the Chipped Fiddle on Instagram. I think that'd be where I would point people to, you know, kind of keep track of what I'm doing. There's not a whole lot of economics on there yet, but I'm kind of hoping to make some sort of podcast in the future, which I will definitely put on there at some point if I ever do that. But yeah. That's
definitely.
probably
And I'd like to point out that Vito is not only a fiddle player and likes economics. He's you said a karate coach?
Karate instructor, yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
You're just well-rounded. Got it
try.
all going on.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me on. It was a lot of fun. And again, you know, all of this is, you know, my subjective opinion for sure. And I recommend people check out, you know, some sort of resource, you know, whatever, if it's the ones that I pointed out, or do some reading for yourself, you know, educate yourself, and, you know, join the conversation a little bit, you know.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Vito.
Cool.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for checking out our episode on the economy. Hopefully, you've learned something. If there's future topics you would like us to cover, be sure to tweet me at Phil Svitek and at Ali Nasta using the hashtag OSK. For your benefit, we've included links to our research so you can dig deeper on the subject matter. Thanks for joining on another episode of Open Source Knowledge. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, like us on Facebook, or check out our YouTube page where we'll be posting more bite-sized tips for everyday use. Also, be sure to comment with your thoughts and opinions. Part of our goal is to build a community to help crowd solve life's problems, and to do that, we need your participation. Thanks in advance.